Hey everyone, we are back once again with the Vampire Hunters, and this video we're going to tackle the flames and begin the OSL effect. And I say begin because this is going to be a lot of work, most of the upper area of this figure, and on the female figure too, she's going to have a little bit of OSL as she is close by. But I thought we would do the flames because they come up every so often and they're quite tricky to do. And we're going to do the hat and basically the shoulder pad. And actually I need to do a lot of experimenting to make this work. I've almost finished all of the OSL now, so I can do that in the next video. But for now, I just want to focus on the flames and getting the most important things, which are the hat and the non-metallic silver shoulder pad done. So a little bit about the paints we're going to use today. I started with this golden yellow and light orange from Vallejo, and the golden yellow is really great. It's got good coverage, it's a nice bright colour, but actually the light orange didn't turn out to be fantastic. Well, very late on in the process I discovered this, aka deep orange, and I ended up replacing all of my orange parts with this, and it was really easy to use, for orange anyway. So I really recommend this paint, it was fantastic. And I'm also using this orange brown, and this was a really nice colour for OSL because it was obviously not an intense orange, and it was really nice to have sort of the leather elements with that orange brown. And I'm also using pastel peach for the highlights, which is nice for anywhere that I want to be highlighted in orange, but I don't want that orange to be super bright. So things like the silver and the hat, this pastel peach was awesome for highlighting. I thought it would be a good idea to start with the brightest colour, which would be yellow, and then just gradually darken it down. So you can see I sprayed it almost white where the flame was. I started with this very cold yellow from Chimera, and you know, as the name suggests, it was a little bit too cold, a little bit too yellow, but I thought, why not start really bright? If it's too bright, I can darken it. So I replaced this with a base coat of the golden yellow, which was really nice for fire. I ended up, and you'll see later, I darkened the flame too much and I actually had to layer up from almost black. So it is possible to do nice flames from a black base coat because, well, I did that later on and you'll see the process. But yeah, I definitely think starting pale and working backwards is the way to go. So here you can see the base coat of golden yellow, and it's just a little bit richer, a little more orange. So yeah, also the coverage is good for this paint, so I really do recommend that one. So here I'm going to be using the light orange that I showed you from Vallejo, and this is where I'd probably use that deep orange. I do use the deep orange later, but I think if I could go back I would start using it at this point. And basically we want the brightest colours to be on the inside, so it's kind of counterintuitive because normally we do highlights and anything that's sort of on the extremities we highlight brighter. This we want it to be like the most intense colour in the centre and it get darker on the way out. So I thought it'd be cool to sort of at the end paint it orange, and we'll get that darker later on. But yeah, we just gradually work backwards with the colours. Here you can see I painted a lot of it orange, leaving just a little bit of yellow in the centre. And I also block out the, I don't know what you call it, the fire stick metal holder thing. The torch, that's the one. So this is the point where I discover the deep orange paint, and you can see how much more powerful and intense it is compared to that light orange. So yeah, maybe the light orange still has its place, but I really like this deep orange, and I think a mix of golden yellow and deep orange is what I would prefer to the light orange, and that's just because of the intensity of the color, better coverage, and yeah, easier to work with. When you're working with difficult colors like yellow, you need to find your paints that make it easy. If I make mistakes, then I did a little bit of a wash of this orange, and that got into all the cracks and crevices of the kind of rocks that are in the torch. I guess they're some things that are on fire in there. So I go back to working backwards again, and I'm going to use corn red and a little bit of black. And this is just a kind of transitional colour into black, because what I want the end to be is smoke actually, but I don't want to jump straight into black. So just this corn red and kind of black colour is fantastic for blending in. So do this on all of the end parts. I built this up a little bit too much. As you can see here, I kind of blocked most of the flames out, and it worked out absolutely fine in the end. But yeah, I went a little bit too far, I think. I'm using pure black at this point for the very ends to represent the smoke. And you can also see some little orange dots, and I left some of the bright orange when I was blocking in the corn red and black. And I thought that would be nice to have sort of little glowing embers running through the smoky sections, yeah, to represent those embers that are popping off. So this is funny because it's kind of like edge highlighting, but with the black. And yeah, this is just to represent where it's turning into smoke. And this is where you can use quite dilute colors and you're just trying to blend it all together. Actually, I quite like looking at this footage here because even though I've painted too much of that corn red and black, where it's orange at the end, it looks really intense. And that contrast of having the dark color around it really starts to make it help feel like a kind of glowing flame. So here is the point where I'm like, oh, I need to build this back up again. I blocked in way too much. And I discovered that corn red and deep orange was a really nice way to start this off. So if you're starting from black, then this is what I would recommend your base coat with. Deep orange and a little corn red is like a nice dark burnt orange. But both those paints have such good coverage, then it was a nice first layer. And then I just built up and highlighted with deep orange. I really enjoyed painting this way. It's definitely the way to go starting light, but I just get on better when we build up from dark to light. It's kind of easier to follow for me. So I left those bright yellow spots in the center, but I'm also building up the outer parts. And actually, annoyingly, I found on the reverse of this sculpt where the flame was kind of sticking outwards, it was way easier to paint than the front. And then I build up with deep orange and golden yellow. And like I said earlier, this mix is awesome. Both these paints are fantastic. And so, yeah, you get pretty good coverage. And this meant it was possible to do a really vibrant orangey flame, even with the dark base coat. So even though it was my mistake to darken it up so much, hopefully it's shown you can kind of go either way, from dark or from light. I finished the tips of the black smoke with some grey, and I used this ash grey, which seems very appropriate, but only really because I'm using that grey throughout this project. But yeah, ash grey, why not? You can highlight this up brighter to almost white if you want, but I kept it quite subtle. Okay, with the flames done, we move on to the areas around it, and this is really tricky to get this right. I started base coating the hat with burnt umber, but I used quite a diluted couple layers just to leave some of that pre-highlight, and I had a bit of orange to mark where my flame was basically going to be strongest, and I made sure my paint was see-through so I could see that point where it was going to be most intense on the top of the hat there. I then kind of re-base coated in a way the side that was facing the light, so I checked anywhere the flame would be able to basically get to, and it got this little bit of a base coat with burnt umber mixed with orange brown. So on this hat, I basically want a cold and a warm side, and this was the base coat for the warm side. This is what I really wanted from the piece, and particularly these models, was that contrast between the cold and the warm. So in this video, we'll deal with the warm elements of this hat, but we're going to do all the kind of cold areas in a later video. This kind of fire and effect took me a long time to work out, so that's why I wanted to keep it quite a narrow subject in this video rather than do all of these different elements in one. So now I start to build up the highlights on the hat with orange brown, and I'm going to use some texture, so I use lots of random lines, but I'm also kind of following some of the little folds that are on the hat. Now, I don't mind if I overdo it on the texture because I can always glaze it back, but basically I want to build the intensity of the orange to get more intense and brighter towards where the fire is very close to the hat, but I also want a lot of texture in the hat. And I think combining those two things, OSL and texture, will be really nice for the competition, obviously the Golden Demon. So I'm really thinking about, the judges and what they're looking at. And I know that they're really into their texture as well, so I think that it's a really good call to do this. After I finished that, I think it's looking really nice. We've got a subtle kind of normal looking leather, but in orange. And now I start to add some pastel peach. Pastel peach is really nice because it's a desaturated orange, and I think this is nice that you can build up the highlights fairly bright, but the orange isn't going to be that rich. It shouldn't be as saturated as the flame itself, so it's kind of like, okay, we've got a bright flame, but it's hitting a boring coloured hat, so we have to really think about and balance, well, how bright is this orange? And I think the pastel peach and the orange brown really helps to control that, because neither of them are particularly bright in terms of how orange they are. And I just gradually add the pastel peach in. It's a fairly light colour, so I was fairly careful. You can see here I'm just doing fine little marks at this point. So we start off quite, rough with lots of texture, and now I'm just really hitting the edges up to define that area. And actually this was super fun, quite forgiving, but not particularly, it didn't take ages to do. So yeah, I really enjoyed this part, whereas the flame itself, I think, was super tricky. So it was nice to get the flame done and move on to just doing these little bits of texture on the hat. I think at this point it's looking really nice. We've got a nice amount of light and you can see the texture running through. So I finish off with probably a final highlight, and this is almost pure pastel peach. I might just keep a little bit of orange brown in it to take away from the purity of the colour. I think pure pastel peach, I don't know, might be a bit too intense. We can always try it and rein it back, but I think this is looking really nice at this point. And you can see I'm really just doing tiny marks now, but it makes a difference. Just a little point at the top of the hat all adds up to the overall feel of it. Even though it's only a tiny little highlight, it really helps. And so it's looking really good here, but to tie it all together, I do a little glaze of burnt umber and orange brown. And this helps to soften and tighten up the texture so it's not so obvious, but it also blends it together. And it's adding a little more intensity to the orange, but not too much. So yeah, I really recommend doing any kind of glazing when you do texture like this, because it really ties it all together. I'm super happy with the effect of that hat. Now you can see it next to the flame. I really like it. Perhaps it doesn't look perfect in the video, but in the hand, I really like the intensity of these two together. So how bright the orange flame is and how bright the hat is. Now we move on to the non-metallic metal silver on the shoulder pad. As a disclaimer, I painted this so many times, I just couldn't quite get it exactly how I wanted, but I think now I know how I would do it. And I base coated with the ash grey, which is, a nice dark grey, but not too dark. And dark sea grey is going to be my main sort of silver colour I use throughout this project. In the next video, you'll see me use dark sea grey mixed on the cold side as well. So I use that colour on both. And basically, I'm going to add in some pastel peach to the dark sea grey and gradually build up the highlights for this non-metallic metal. So we're trying to get a few things right here. We need the volume, so the size of the highlight, correct for the shoulder pad. And we also want the intensity of the orange to, match the flame. I don't want this to be like a shiny silver, because I want them to be quite a worn out silver, so it's not chrome, and that definitely affects things because chrome would reflect the orange in a really bright way. This is what's hard to balance on OSL, and I found it a real challenge because there was lots of different details that were very, very small relatively, and they're in this really tight space, so yeah, it's quite a tricky figure actually. But I just gradually built up the pastel peach, and eventually I did get a bright enough highlight, but I didn't quite feel that the colour was intense enough, so I used various glazes. I did in fact use deep orange from AK, that bright orange we use for the flame, and it was just way too powerful, so in the end I used the orange brown again, and this was just so fantastic because the brown desaturated colour represents the old steel, and then we do get a little bit of the orange from the flame, obviously. If you wanted it to be like chrome, then the deep orange would work as a reflection, but for the look I wanted, I needed it to be a little more subtle. So I basically played around with all these colours, glazes back and forth, and it did kind of go on forever. So it doesn't feel like a perfect step-by-step guide, but hopefully I've shown you what I did here. Lucky for me, I kind of have a second attempt to show you how to do this. I had a lot more success when I did the female vampire hunter, so I'm looking forward to showing you that. Anyway, that is it for this week's video, but I think painting flames is something, it comes up quite often, so hopefully this is a nice guide for you to paint flames. And I'm really happy with the orange texture with OSL on the hat, so yeah, I'm definitely really happy with those. The reason I haven't included more elements in this video is I repainted a lot of stuff. So I think I painted, I did the gloves twice, I did the collar a couple times, I painted the chest 3 times. So yeah, the filming process isn't going as smoothly as normal, and I think that's because it is a Golden Demon piece and I want it to be just right. I'll give you one example. Is I filmed how to do non-metallic metal gold on loads of parts and I didn't like the gold, so I repainted it all silver, so it just cost me a bunch of time. But I hope that when I do the video I can explain to you my reasons for changing, and hopefully it helps show you that not everyone's perfect and I make lots of mistakes I have to change too, and that becomes relatable. And I'll just take you through that process. But a lot of the reason I'm making these changes is because I want this piece to be one of my best. And we've only got a few weeks left, so the stress is mounting up. But anyway, hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope it's helpful for you painting your flames and you can have fun with that. Any comments, please leave them. I always read them. And I'll see you very soon, and we'll be carrying on with much of the same stuff. More non-metallic metal, more leather, and definitely much more success and some recipes for you to follow. See you then.